I suspect, to speak on some of these issues. So to begin proceedings, might I request Dinesh ji to present an interview to Rahul. Thank you. Thank you, and over to you.
Yes.
As you know, this left socialist revolutionary terrorism, as the Naxalism is categorized, has a very long history, but its systematic study has a very recent past. In the last, I think, 2 decades, quite a large number of books have been written on the subject. Some are very scholarly, learned, academic, written by sociologists, psychologists, economists, journalists, while some are of topical interest based on events. Some are written by very starry-eyed romantics who sentimental and tearjerkers, sort of, while there are others written by very aggressive, militaristic, saying that they are bandits and they should be annihilated and all. But what you have written is something very unique, novel, in that you have personally verified all, whatever you have written, you have personally gone to all the action spots, met from all the dramatis personae as such, and you have met even the topmost Politburo members, as well as the action squad killers, from the DGP to the constables, from contractors to politicians. So, and it's really an eye-opener and, as you say, untold story. We have never known so many things that you have written. But Rahul, I would like to know only one thing, that was it necessary for you to travel all the way to all the remote places, action spots in the Naxal country, which is also the heartland of India, or you could have done it equally well, sitting in the state headquarters and getting all the information?
I personally have a problem with that kind of journalism because you know, I have a set of friends who work with TV channels or even newspapers who cover Parliament or South Block or North Block, as they call it, various ministries, and they often talk about this journalistic neutrality, etc. But I tell them that when one goes to Bastar, you know, these fancy terms, neutrality, etc., they look like hopscotch. They don't hold any water when you're traveling in an area like Bastar. Personally, for me, I think this country is going through a lot of dark times right now, and it's very important for a journalist to take a stand. But that stand, unfortunately, he cannot take from a place like Delhi or state headquarters in Calcutta. He can't do that because most of his information sources are based on you know, either police. So he's having a nice lunch at the press club, and about 4 o'clock he'll go to the SP of police or a joint secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs, who will be most probably from his hometown, or you know, he'll have some native connections. And over a cup of tea or a couple of Monaco biscuits, you know, he'll very discreetly hand him a document, which will be his version, the Home Ministry's or the police's version of a particular event. But in my own experience, when I traveled in these areas, I found out that you know, what has actually happened is diametrically opposite from in many cases, what you hear in a place like Delhi or any other state headquarters. My interest in Naxal area especially stemmed from the fact that I come from Kashmir, which is a conflict zone, and I was very young. At the age of 14, I was driven out of a land where my ancestors had lived for thousands of years. So I know what homelessness is all about, and I'm very aware of it on a day-to-day basis. So when I started my journalism in 96, 97, that was the time when most of the journalists worth their salt would go to Kashmir, because Kashmir was, quote-unquote, the sexy insurgency. That's where you got your Ramnath Goenka awards, etc., etc. But since I was an affected party in Kashmir in more ways than one, I chose to go to Bastar in the Naxal-affected areas. Now, when one traveled in these areas in 97, 98, one got a very clear idea of what the situation would turn out to be in the coming years. I'll give you a very small incident. I was traveling in Odisha in what is known as the hunger corridor, Kalahandi-Borandi-Koraput corridor. The story is slightly different now, but I'm talking about 98. And I was traveling with a guide, and he told me that there's a Adivasi here, a middle-aged Adivasi, whose son, I believe, had died the previous week. And he would speak in broken Hindi, so I got to speak to him directly without the assistance of my guide, my handler. So I spoke to him. I said, "Sahab, मैंने सुना कि आपका," I spoke to him in Hindi. I said, "मैंने सुना आपका बेटा मरा." He said, "हाँ साहब." So I thought he must have died of cholera or any malaria perhaps. So I got talking to him. I said, "कैसे मरा?" He said, "उनको बीमारी था." So I said, "किस चीज़ का बीमारी था?" So he said something which left me completely shaken. I got goosebumps. He said, "उसको भूख का बीमारी था." So here was a man who had resigned so much to his fate that he thought that bhukh, the hunger, is a disease. So once I went back and shared this with my friends, especially those who work with in newspapers, they wouldn't understand something like this. It's like, come on, we're talking about 98. People don't die of hunger in 98. We have liberalization. Manmohan Singh has already done, waved his magic wand, and we are in good hands. And they spoke about a couple of terms they would use as business journalists: $1 trillion economy and inclusive growth. I mean, these terms I really don't understand. But after 2004-05, when a lot of focus shifted from Kashmir to the Maoist affected areas, we know now for sure, because of so much of coverage in this area, that hunger is a everyday reality in this part of the country, and people, as we speak, are still dying of hunger and malnutrition, especially in this area.
Rahul, I'm sure many of you would like to talk to him.
Why isn't there more Indian literature around such kinds of catharsis, in the sense, partition, this migration from Kashmir? Nobody's writing about this. What do you think explains that kind of silence in our psyche as Indians?
I think much has been written about the partition of 1947, worked in partition, not only in English but in other Indian languages, especially in Punjabi. There is so much in Urdu. In Bengali, for example, I know so much literature which has been written on partition. But as far as the story of Kashmiri Pandits is concerned, the problem which I think is responsible for not much of literature coming from that particular area, that particular genre, is that most of the time my generation had was spent in regaining some of what we had lost in Kashmir in the exodus of 1990. So our immediate focus was to regain that financial stability. So instead of writing books, we focused on becoming engineers, etc. And then you sort of rebuild your houses and then rebuild your lives. And in the process, the scholarship was lost because in Kashmir we had that kind of culture. Even some of my uncles who would work as clerks in J&K Bank, for example, they would do their job between 10 to 6. But in the evening when they would return, they would have a Tagore's Gitanjali in their hand, or they would talk about Jean Paul Sartre, etc. That was the kind of culture we had. But after migration, as it happens with any other exile, when you lose your home, you also lose your moorings in more ways than one. So that scholarship was lost. But I'm very hopeful because the new generation which has come after us, they don't face that kind of problem. They have this. Some of them have this sense of rootlessness, but I'm hoping that some kind of literature will evolve out of that rootlessness.
And a quick follow-up question: the door to go back, is that closed for good, in your opinion?
Right now, it's not possible for us to go. The situation is not. I think in the last few years, the situation has turned from bad to worse. And by 2014, you will see what I mean, because there's this complete radicalization of the majority community in Kashmir Valley. Because I visit often. I've just come back day before from Kashmir, and that was my first visit after I wrote this book, because I made many enemies after I wrote this book. So I didn't tell my parents that I was visiting Srinagar. They would have been worried. But I told my friends, and they asked me to be very careful, because right now we know it's very easy to get a gun, and you'll be walking and someone will come and shoot you in your back, and you will be dead. Nobody bothers about these things in a conflict zone like Kashmir. So yes, coming back to your question, I don't think it's immediately possible. But there are many of us who would like to return back one day.
May I?
Yes, please.
All about how it feels like to be a Muslim, in the world, how they're being victimized, very subtle undertones. So this is going to be a different perspective where we'll actually get to read about, the turbulence that, the Kashmiri Pandits face. Now, because of your travels and your experience meeting so many people, I just wanted to ask you, do you feel that there's a secular Islamist movement, and do you think that it's got its due as yet? Because we all hear that, a certain section or a minority, the extremists. What about the, the modern secular voice of India? And do you feel that they've got, the modern secular voice has got its due or not?
No, I think, among my immediate circle, even in Kashmir, I know of so many people, not only from Kashmir, but from other parts of the country also, who are, who love this country. They are Muslim, they are very secular. They don't think about someone being a Hindu or a Muslim. They don't cater to a particular kind of ideology. The problem with this country is to see that at the end of the day, religion will decide in a particular area whether you live or die. So no matter who I am, how much secular I am, even if I'm a leftist or of any other ideology, if I'm a minority in Kashmir and there will be turbulence, I'll be the target. The same thing happens in a place like Gujarat. So no matter who you are, a person like Ehsan Jafri, who is one of the humanists I know, it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, but because you have a certain name, your name is Ehsan Jafri. So the mob which will come to kill you will not see what you've done, will not check your CV or your resume. So he'll kill you. So in that way, minority anywhere in this country, the Muslims are facing problems at so many places. So it's not a black and white thing. So there are grays in between.
You've done a lot of travel in Iraq and Sri Lanka. Would you like to share some?
Not much, but I've been there. In Iraq, I was in 2003 when the war was on. And if time permits me, I'll like to tell you a very small. It's not a very small anecdote, but I'll shorten it as much as possible. In 2003, when we landed in Jordan first, because we didn't have visas for Iraq, and this is at a time when Saddam Hussein was still in power. So there were about 2,500 journalists who were in Jordan, in Amman at that point of time, trying to get across to Iraq, but they were all stuck there. So we would try and do our work there because there were a lot of protests happening there at that point of time. There were Palestinian settlements, and every day after the prayers, afternoon prayers, they would come and protest. There were a lot of refugees coming from Iraq, so we talked to them and get a sense of what was happening there. So in due course of time, we spent a few weeks there. In due course of time, I made this friend there who drove a Mercedes-Benz. It was a cab there. They have Mercedes-Benz as a cab. So he was a young boy, roughly of my age. I was 27, so he must be about 25, 26. He was from Palestine, and he drove this taxi. So every day we traveled with him, and we became friends, and he would speak in broken English. So one day I was traveling with him, and every day I would hear him singing this funny ditty in Arabic, which went something like this: Bush, shili dah, hadal hachi mai fida. So every time, out of boredom, partially out of boredom, one day I asked him, I said, what the hell does this mean? And we would sing this loudly because we had nothing else to do across Amman and other areas where we traveled in his taxi. So he said that this means that Bush, don't put your hands into Iraq, you'll burn your hands. So fair enough. So we're waiting, and one day, since I worked for an Indian organization, we hardly had any money. But there was another female journalist from Romania who had some spare money, and she bribed the Jordanian border officials one day. And she said that 3 of us will like to cross over the Jordanian border, and will like to travel to Iraq. So they got some money, and they said, okay, you go, but we're not responsible for anything that will happen to you. So they made us sign this undertaking, which said that the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan will not be responsible for our safety, etc. So with 3 of us, me, another journalist, female journalist, and this woman from the Romania radio, we crossed this Jordan border, and there's about 200, 300 meters of no man's land. And then there's this Iraqi border where Saddam Hussein is still in power, and we see a big statue of his there on the border. There's also a portrait, and the gate is made like those 2 crossed swords, etc. So the moment we landed the Al-Karama border, we were surrounded by the Republican guards, the dreaded Republican guards. So we picked up some Arabic from Jordan and elsewhere, and we tried to tell them who we are. So they check our passports. Of course, the passports are there, but there are no Iraqi visas. So I tell them, I said Sahafi, which essentially means you're a journalist, and Tasweer, where we have cameras with us, we are journalists, etc. Suddenly, in a matter of few minutes, their commander came, and he was very hostile. So he started shouting abuses at us, expletives in Arabic. We didn't know what. So suddenly, about 20, 25 men surrounded us, and they started cocking their AK-47s. So I look at this woman, my young friend, and there's no blood on her face. It's all in her ears. Her ears have become red because of fear. I look at the other man, and his legs are shaking, and I don't look at my own legs. And I thought, we are dead, and they'll sort of kill us very slowly and make a video out of it, something we don't know. Suddenly, out of some divine intervention, I started singing this ditty, which I had learned from Muhammad. Bush, shili dah, hadal hachi mai fida. And the first response was his AK-47 went down, he caught hold of his stomach and rolled on the road. So in hindsight, it must have felt to him as some foreigner comes to India and sings Mera Juta Hai Japan. So in the next few minutes, he made me sing this about 40-50 times. He called villagers from across the village and said, I was like a specimen. So about 40-50 times I was made to sing this, and they would laugh every time I would sing this. So after 40-50 times I got so upset. I thought, if he's going to tell me again to sing it, I said, let him put a blood across my head and I'm not going to sing it again. Which he of course did not do. They did not allow us to cross, but there was a vehicle coming from Iraq back into Jordan. So they pushed us into that vehicle and sent us back to Amman. Of course, before sending us to Iraq, Muhammad thought that we'll be dead. So he had in his mind that, this is my final goodbye to my friend. So he hugged me for about 4 or 5 minutes. He wouldn't let go of me. And he did that Arabic kiss which they do. And, he was delighted to see me back. And he said, I told you that this is going to be very dangerous. Don't do this. So we came back to Amman. 3 days later, Saddam Hussein government fell, and then we crossed into Iraq, which is another story. But this is what happens at that. That's the only time I went to Iraq. We stayed there for about 1.5 months, surviving mostly on Mari biscuits and water. And we stayed in this hotel, which had no management at that point of time, Hotel Palestine in the heart of Baghdad. And there would be time, and of course when we entered Iraq, it was like I've never forgotten those images. Of course, the whole city was on fire, and there were people reduced to skeleton in their cars, burned to death, etc. And it was a disaster. Later, when I traveled back to Amman after 1.5 months, I realized that I'm so stressed that I've forgotten the PIN number of my ATM card, which may not be a big thing for you, but I have a John Nash kind of fascination with numbers. I still remember my 10th board roll number. It was 616564. So for me, forgetting a PIN number, particular number, means that I'm badly stressed.
Let's take last 2 questions. Last 2.
One here. Continuing on from what you were just saying, do you see a role being played by, for want of a better word, the NGO or voluntary sector? Are they trying to intervene, and what is the relationship they have with the locals and with you?
I've not seen much good work done by the NGOs in this particular area. NGOs in many cases are fronts for money laundering. So you have an NGO in Ranchi which says that we'll do a lot of good work. They get money from foreign organizations, and then they don't do anything. They'll transport these young teenage girls to Delhi and make them work as maid servants. That's all they do. I have personally not seen any NGO do any kind of substantial, solid work in any of these areas. And trust me, I've traveled in almost every village, every taluka, in every possible Naxal affected state.
Very interesting question.
Thank you, Rahul, and I might just request you to stay on a few minutes to sign the book.
Other media people.